This is a video response to a young lady who goes by the name of Greek Fire for Christ. She posted a video recently. She titled it, "Hey Atheists, what's your excuse?" So, that always makes me a little bit weary when I see a title like that, because I don't think for one moment that there is anything in atheism that needs to be defended in any way or excused or whatnot. So usually I tend to ignore videos like that, but in this particular case some things were said that I believe need responding to. So let's get to the nitty-gritty of it. Let's see what the actual questions are. Okay, here we go.
What is it with people constantly attacking the belief systems of others that they don't understand?
Okay. The funny thing is that on the surface of listening to a question like that, what you are asking, what you are looking for an answer to, is a reasonable thing to ask, because you are quite right that it is rather an indefensible really thing to do, to attack something that you don't understand. But therein lies the rub. You see, you are approaching the atheist, generically speaking, somebody who is an atheist, and you are immediately making the assumption, and this is the funny thing, you are accusing us, atheists, of attacking a belief system that we don't understand, but underlying that claim is the assumption that we don't understand the belief system. You see what I'm saying? The question itself inherently contains a prejudice. You have assumed straight off the bat that any atheist who decides to attack any religion and for any reason does not know what they're talking about. Now, there are plenty of examples of, first of all, there are plenty of examples here on YouTube of people who genuinely have no idea what they're talking about. And there are plenty of examples of that within the so-called atheist community. So your question in that sense is not unreasonable. There is an awful lot of ignorance out there, and an awful lot of people are acting out of ignorance. But there are plenty of videos on YouTube, and there are plenty of critiques on religions such as yours that are perfectly valid and that clearly show that the person making the criticism knows exactly what they're talking about. They know what they're criticizing, and they criticize it well, and they usually get no coherent response from the person they're criticizing. Having said that, I agree that it is completely unacceptable to simply blanket criticize religion as if it's one big happy family of stupid people who all think the exact same silly things. You will not find me in that camp. But to assume that every attack on a religion, on every religion, is born out of ignorance, is ignorant in itself.
How could you hope to understand something that you've already studied with a bias?
You see, that's the second mistake you're making. Who says that those people who are criticizing religions and religious positions have studied it with a bias? A lot of us who are atheists who are not religious did not come into this from a position of bias at all. A lot of us grew up in religious families, and this isn't true for me, but many of us were religious at some point, were Christians, and obviously at that point in time, if they had any bias at all, those people would have been biased towards their Christianity or their Islam or whatever belief system they embraced at the time. However, there came a point in their life where, for whatever reason, it stopped making sense to them. They had to try and reconcile within their own minds the doubts they were feeling and the things they were meant to believe in. They couldn't do it, and then they lost their belief system. And if there's any bias involved against their old religion, that only came into place after that occurrence. So, no, this is not a case of addressing religions from a biased position from the start. Talking from my own perspective, I was brought up in a family that was nominally Catholic, Roman Catholic, but religion just never played a very important role in our family. It just didn't feature much, and whether it's as a result of that or not, I don't know, but even though as a kid I was interested in the religion that I was meant to be part of, it simply never made sense to me. And I tried for a long time to make sense of it and to somehow incorporate it into my own worldview. I just couldn't do it. And it was when I was 11 years old that I finally realized that I was not the only one in this position, and that there was actually a name for people like me, and that people like me were called atheists. I didn't study this with a bias. I didn't study religion with the intent from the get-go to dismiss it as the bunch of nonsense that I actually think it is, but that is what I arrived at. I did not start with a bias. And again, that is a prejudice that you are projecting on the people that you're talking about. You think that because you, for some reason, arrived at this position where you felt you needed to be a Christian, that anybody who studied your religion or who was interested in your religion or who in any way, thought about your religion and arrived at the opposite conclusion, that your religion is not for them, must have been biased from the start. No, it doesn't work like that, sorry.
You've studied it from the perspective of this is not real, this is BS,
No.
This is fake, this is false. How do you expect to get anything out of it?
No, like I said, we studied it from the perspective of I am a Catholic, aren't I? So this is supposed to make sense to me. I want this to make sense to me. But sadly, it doesn't.
If you cannot take it from an unbiased perspective, how do you expect, please answer the question, how do you expect to find anything if you cannot study from an unbiased position?
May I suggest that you apply those wise words that you just uttered there to yourself?
You're doing what you accuse Christians of doing all the time. Endeavoring to learn something, but already starting with the answer. You're starting by saying that God isn't real and the Bible is a book of fairy tales, and then you study it as though it's a book of fairy tales rather than unbiasedly saying, I don't know what this is, so I'm going to look at it objectively and see what happens.
And what happened, sadly, was that after trying for 11 years, I realized that the Bible is a book of fairy tales. At least, and I have to put in this caveat, at least if you're going to approach it from the perspective of, could this book possibly contain factual information about physical reality? Then it becomes a farce, a joke, a book of fairy tales, as people put it. Now, I'm quite willing and I'm quite interested in approaching the Bible in a different way, in looking at it as a book of expression of the way the people at the time that wrote it, the people that wrote it, understood morality. A poetic expression of how they related to the world around them and the beliefs that they held at the time. And if I look at the Bible in that way, it is not just a book of fairy tales. It's a document, a historical document, not in the sense that what's in it is historically accurate, but in the sense that it was written 2000 years ago, or thereabouts, and that there is value to be had from understanding how people thought at the time. As such, the book is immensely valuable. But start telling me that it contains factual information about how, for example, the world was created, and I have to dismiss it as a book of fairy tales. Yes.
Please, just, give me a word or two on that. How can you expect us?
You had a few words more than two, didn't you? This should do, shouldn't it?
To defend the Word of God when you already have an answer in your head.
This is an interesting point you're getting at now. You are confronted with somebody like me. I am 44 years old and I have been an atheist all my life. And you are approaching me, and you are, of course, being a Christian as you are, and for some reason feeling compelled to, as you call it, defend the Word of God against me. You will find conversations with me intensely frustrating, because you will, from your perspective, think that I am extremely closed-minded. I will cut short conversations left, right and center. But the reason for that is that I've heard it all before. I've heard it all before, and I've heard it again and again and again and again and again and again and again. And I'm sick of it. You can understand where I'm coming from. I do not want somebody to present me for the 5,000th time with Pascal's wager, for example. And if you don't know what that is, look it up. So please forgive me if I seem a little closed-minded, which I can assure you I am not, except I will not open my mind to the point where my brain falls out.
I'm not saying that you have to play fair, but, just ask yourself that question.
In actual fact, I do think you have to play fair. You do. But that also means that you take your responsibilities seriously. And you do not come into a conversation with somebody like me from the perspective that I should buy into arguments that you present that I've heard debunked 1,000 times already. Do you get that? I do not want to have to listen to the same old again. I will not listen to the same old again. Because trying to derail the conversation by repeating the same tired old arguments over and over again is also a case of not playing fair. I trust you can see that.
Where are you any different from the people you harp on when you already start with the answer? And then you go out and retrieve information that backs up your answer and only backs up your answer.
No, like I said, I spent years of my life trying to get my head around the religion that I grew up in, trying to make it make sense to me so I could adopt it, because I thought that was what was expected of me, and I failed to do so, despite trying.
Trust me, I'm just as annoyed with the young earth theorists who do the same thing.
Don't ever call them theorists again.
If you're going to study anything, you need to do it from an unobjective perspective, and when I did, you can see by my explaining the direction I went in.
Good for you.
But what's your excuse? Thanks.
Now I've already, alluded to what my excuse is, but let me spell it out to you so that it is abundantly clear to you. You see, it is completely pointless to entertain a notion that is obviously false. I do not need to take a middle ground on a position that is ludicrous. I do not need to try and find an objective middle of the road position when, for example, I'm talking to a flat earther. The earth is not flat. It is roughly ball-shaped. There is so much evidence supporting that claim that I do not need to consider any alternative if it's based on the premise that the earth is flat. The earth is roughly 5 billion years old. The universe is roughly 13.7 billion years old. Give or take a nice convenient little margin of error of several 100 million years, if not a billion years, that is a fact. And there is no point in arguing with somebody who is denying basic facts about reality like that. Would you argue with somebody who in all sincerity, with the sun beating onto his head, claims that there is no such thing as a sun? Would you seriously enter into a discussion or a dialogue with that person as if there is some new ground to be found, some new possible different outlook on reality to be explored? I sincerely hope not, because you'd be wasting your life chasing phantoms. And I, for one, am not interested in doing that with whatever remains of my life. And if you want to call that looking at your religion from a biased perspective, then I'm biased and I'm proud.